Hello, I'm Dr. Scott Watier.
And I'm Tommy Welling, and you're listening to the Fasting for Life podcast.
This podcast is about using fasting as a tool to regain your health, achieve ultimate wellness, and live the life you truly deserve.
Each episode is a short conversation on a single topic with immediate actionable steps. We cover everything from fat loss and health and wellness to the science of lifestyle design.
We started Fasting for Life because of how fasting has transformed our lives, and we hope to share the tools that we have learned along the way. Hey everyone, welcome to the Fasting for Life podcast. My name is Dr. Scott Watier, and I'm here, as always, with my good friend and colleague, Tommy Welling. Good afternoon to you, sir.
Hey, Scott, how are you?
Fantastic, my friend. Excited for today's conversation. We're going to title this one, Metabolic Health Basics, Why Your Fasting Isn't Working Yet. So it's going to be a fun conversation. This is going to come off of an article, a deep dive article that Levels Health did on metabolic basics and metabolic insights, and really just kind of skimming through it and reading through it. There were so many connection points to what we do and how we operate here at Fasting for Life. So if you're new to the podcast, I want to welcome you in. Thanks for joining us. Give a shout out to a couple of new listeners here in just a minute. Happy to have you on this fasting journey with us. If you are new and you want to learn more about why we do what we do and why we have our episodes every week and our resources and our challenges and coaching and all of that, head back to episode 0 and episode 1. I'll give you a brief intro to Tommy, myself, our stories, and how fasting just kind of motivated us to make change and how fasting transformed our lives and ultimately why we keep doing what we do and trying to help more people, pull you out of the matrix one by one into the fasting world and help you lose the weight, get healthy, increase that longevity, whatever your true health goals are, not just about the weight loss, but about the lifestyle transformation. So excited to have you with us. If you're a long-term listener, thank you so much for the continued support, the downloads, the comments, all of the shares that we hear about. Just excited to continue the conversation today about how we once and for all, get off the diet roller coaster and achieve those long-term results. So, Tom, let's give a quick shout out before we get in.
Yeah, absolutely. We have a couple of new reviews on Spotify, so thank you guys. Let's see. Isaiah Praise 1968 said, "Love the show, guys. Give it a 5-star rating." So appreciate that. Thank you very much. And let us know how you're doing. Let us know how your fasting journey is going too. And that was on from episode 22, insulin, blood sugar, and so going in the Wayback Machine there. So and then we had another one here from British Far East Traders that said, "Love this podcast. Thank you so much." And you're very welcome. So, and that one came from episode 220, Fasting Blueprint for Sustainable Weight Loss. So that's a really, really good one where we broke down the blueprint to fasting for fat loss. And in that one, we give some really, really good actionable tips and kind of go through the outline of the blueprint, which is an awesome, awesome resource. So go check it out if you haven't done so already. You can get that at thefastingforlife.com on the resources page.
You can also grab it in the show notes. I believe we have a direct link there as well.
Perfect.
We'll zoom it over to your inbox. Great resource. Thanks for the shout out. Thanks for listening in. All right, let's get into it, Tommy. So metabolic health basics, why your fasting isn't working yet. So we're going to talk big picture here about, let's be honest. Most people come to fasting for weight loss. There is a huge amount of things that happen beneath the surface when you use fasting as a lifestyle tool. And really, in this episode, we're going to talk about, 30, 35 minutes-ish. We reserve the right to possibly go a little bit longer, but we try to keep it clear, concise, succinct, and give you some action steps off of it. Mm-hmm. We're going to define metabolic health in plain English. We're going to unpack glucose and insulin because that is at the root of 8 out of the 10 leading causes of all-cause mortality. There is a blood sugar insulin component, hormone component to it. We're going to explain how fasting changes that metabolic operating system. So what you're doing and seeing beneath the surface. So this is why we see these long-term changes in labs and reversal of diabetes and reduction of medications and prevention of these chronic lifestyle conditions. And then we're going to talk about some next steps about what you can do based off of what we talk about today. Mm-hmm. So when we looked at the Levels article, here's the problem. We're all trying to improve. We're all trying to lose weight. We're all trying to have that next yearly check-in with the doc go better, right? So we're fasting. We're wearing CGMs. We're counting calories, tracking macros, working out more. The problem is, though, we're still tired, inflamed, and sometimes we just feel stuck. And the missing piece is the understanding of some of these metabolic health fundamentals, not just let's just skip breakfast and restrict my eating. Now, we've done tons of episodes and article deep dives where that's the lever they pull. We just did one recently where the only thing they changed was the timing. And then you saw all of these, under the surface metabolic benefits, that were happening. So we're going to define metabolic health, explain glucose and insulin, how fasting interacts and really hacks the system. I don't like the word hack, but optimizes the system. And then we'll talk about, pulling back the curtain on some of the metabolic basics, and really put it into an actionable plan. So Tommy, I think we should start with the definition of metabolic health. So I was thinking about how to say this, and really just, it comes down to how efficiently and flexibly your body converts food into usable energy without the collateral damage like excess fat, fatty liver, inflammation, high blood sugar, high blood pressure, etc. And the definition of metabolic health is really going to be looking at the 5 classic markers. So waist circumference, fasting glucose, triglycerides, HDL, and blood pressure. We're not going to get too much into the metabolic syndrome lab chemistry, but the reality is if you are feeling, like, what does that feel like on a day-to-day basis? Right? So afternoon crashes, needing coffee or that quick sweet treat pick-me-up, brain fog, stubborn belly fat, poor sleep, being hangry, having unbalanced hunger hormones. That's how it shows up that we have an underlying issue if you've been trying to lose weight, lost some weight, put it back on, etc. Those are the day-to-day kind of how it shows up, but what's happening, the metabolic stuff beneath the surface presents itself. Good metabolic health feels like stable energy, clear thinking, no hangriness, stable hunger signals, being able to close your window on time, set a fasting timer most of the time with relatively, with relative ease, easier weight management or weight loss, better mood. Because the reality is, like I mentioned, most of us came to fasting to lose weight and feel better, right? And I won't share my whole story. Head back to episode 01 if you want to hear it. But under the hood, what we're really trying to do is get better flexibility from a metabolic standpoint.
Yeah, and it's not always easy to understand what that means, especially if you haven't dove in, if you haven't worn a CGM, if you haven't really even gotten past that initial weight loss that is so glaringly obvious that you really want to take care of. And like you said, Scott, that's why most of us, or many of us, find fasting, is because there's this weight that we need to lose. We need to burn through these excess stored calories that we pre-ate, that we pre-consumed a long time ago, potentially maybe decades ago. And I need to burn through those. And I know that that's an obvious, issue. And it might not be until you start to really make some headway on that front that you can really start to address the underlying metabolic issues that are still there. Like, you still don't feel 100%. There's still room for improvement, but maybe there's been some big changes on the scale. Maybe you're halfway to your goal or your forever weight, or maybe you're getting pretty dang close to long-term maintenance already. And then you're like, okay, well, I don't have that much more weight to lose, but still at the same time, I feel like I could probably feel a lot better, and I really would like to. And then you're also seeing that light at the end of the tunnel. Like, you have much more optimism because the system and the tools are working for you, but there's more work to still be done. That's where I was at, when I started my fasting journey, I had 65, 70 pounds that I needed to burn through. And it wasn't really until I was probably like 40 pounds into that number. So more than halfway there, when I started realizing, okay, I'm feeling better. And the scale's slowing down, the movement on the scale is slowing down, but at the same time, I can now feel the hunger cues, and they're much more pronounced than they used to be. but I still feel like there's big room for improvement. And I can understand the way that foods make me feel. So if I go back and dip back into some of those old habits, those old more indulgent foods, or when I have a really late dinner rather than an earlier, more metabolically efficient, metabolically insulin sensitive kind of dinner time, like 5 o'clock versus 7:30,
Yep.
then I'm seeing the difference in how I'm feeling, and I know that there's more work that I can improve upon. And then it was like but it wasn't until I started wearing a CGM where I
Yep.
could start associating that data a little bit more, and we hear that a lot too.
Yeah, so let's compartmentalize metabolic health, which we're talking about here, and your story there of kind of how it showed up in your day to day was perfect. Then we'll talk about blood sugar, because we say this often is, to have real, true health and vitality and energy and reach your goal weight and maintain it, right? Become part of that 5% that keeps it off. You have to have stable blood sugar, stable insulin, and cortisol. So sleep, stress response, right? Those three things need to be part of it. So when we look at that metabolic health, I want to make a clear distinction here. Your metabolism is your body's system for converting food into energy. Metabolic health is a measure of how well that system works, how efficiently your cells respond to insulin, regulate blood sugar, and sustain energy. So insulin it's like the gatekeeper. It takes the energy from your bloodstream and shuttles it in to your cells to be used for energy. If it doesn't, it then gets stored as glycogen and then ultimately as fat. So metabolic health is going to be those optimal ranges without medication: blood glucose, triglycerides, HDL, cholesterol, and blood pressure, and waist circumference. So by definition, where we're at as an American society here in the US, fewer than 1 in 8 Americans qualify for this. So this is something, this metabolic health, it develops silently over the years and shows up long before conditions like type 2 diabetes or heart disease become diagnosable. So it's a root cause. It's not like a single compartment of diagnosis. And it effectively touches almost virtually every system in the body. So 93% of Americans have at least one sign of metabolic dysfunction. One in 3 adults has prediabetes and don't know it.
Wow.
And this process of metabolic dysfunction or dysregulation, I like that term as well, typically starts 10 to 15 years before you get a lab that puts you in a certain category in a diagnosis standpoint. The great news is, especially with a fasting lifestyle, this metabolic health, not metabolism, but your metabolic health is incredibly responsive to lifestyle changes, small, consistent changes in food, timing of not just what, but when, movement, and sleep. This is why we talk about some of these foundational pillars in our coaching, is that, we need to manage our stress and our sleep to allow our body to function properly. So why blood sugar? Why insulin? Why does this matter? Well, blood glucose, blood sugar, and glucose are all the same words. This is the amount of glucose or energy you have circulating in your bloodstream at any given moment. Right? So this is your cell's primary fuel. Now, we also have ketones, right? That's a conversation for a different day. Your body, once you ingest food or have a stress response or blood sugar is exercised, blood sugar is dumped into the bloodstream, your body then works to bring it back down to baseline by moving glucose into the cells, like I mentioned. And that movement is driven by the key player of insulin. So the problem isn't the glucose itself. The problem is the chronic elevation and repeated large spikes. That's going to drive the underlying inflammatory process, which can lead to things like heart disease, accelerate that cellular aging, and train your cells over time to stop responding to insulin, which then ends up leading us down the path of the prediabetes, diabetes kind of epidemic that we're seeing.
Yeah, because
that's the true definition of insulin resistance. Go ahead.
Thank you. So we get those big spikes, and then those big blood sugar spikes are then they're sensed by the pancreas, which then the pancreas actually excretes more insulin. So then you have these larger insulin dumps from the pancreas, and then the trouble is that then your cells become desensitized to those insulin signals. So that's when we get mounting insulin resistance, and so it's. But even just the fact that insulin resistance is reversible, I think, is a very important part of the conversation too. And because it's not a diagnosis, it's not a chronic diagnosis of insulin resistance. It's your body is in a state of insulin resistance, and that's not just a yes or no. That's a gradient. There's many levels of insulin resistance. There's minor, moderate, and much more severe.
Right.
And it can take longer. The longer that you've had insulin resistance, yes, the longer it can take to reverse it. But with properly utilizing the levers that we're going to be talking about on a foundation of fasting, these are absolutely reversible conditions. But in the traditional medical model, they're not discussed as very reversible conditions. You don't hear. I mean, you hear more now in the last decade than we did in the prior 40 or 50 years. But at the same time, a lot of times it's still discussed that once somebody has diabetes or even pre-diabetes, that there's not a lot of talk about reversal in the traditional medical model. And there's a lot of reasons for that we won't get into today, but we are going to be talking about the ways to reverse these things, not if it's reversible, but how to reverse it.
So glucose, insulin, right? Glucose, short-term energy fuel. The problem with the standard American diet, modern, convenient food, noise, obesogenic food environment world that we live in, and a lot of the recommendations to eat less, move more, stimulate your metabolism, 3 small meals plus snacks every day, that's going to keep your glucose and your short-term fuel elevated throughout the day. And those big frequent spikes followed by crashes are what I used to feel, even counting calories and tracking macros.
Yep.
So insulin, the traffic cop, decides whether it's going to get burned or stored. That overexposure leads to that resistance. How it shows up again, what it feels like, Tommy, to the varying degrees that you just mentioned of insulin resistance, harder to lose weight despite eating less, always hungry, specifically for carbs and sweets, sleep disruption, nighttime waking or snoring, obstructive sleep apnea. I used to snore a lot.
Yep, me too.
My wife now tells me I don't. Occasionally, if I've eaten a later meal, I don't drink anymore. That used to be a big lever. If I had any alcohol, I would snore like cutting wood in the middle of the night.
Right.
Like a chainsaw. Losing the weight absolutely helped. But there's this, so sleep disruption, snoring is one of these early indicators of this process taking place. And your lab's creeping up. This is part of my story. Part of so many stories that we hear from people, fasting glucose, triglycerides, blood pressure. And I'm like, I'm doing all the right things. Like, what's wrong? So the biggest lever for improving glucose and insulin is when and what you eat, not how many supplements you take or how many steps you get in. Yes,
or how many calories.
How many calories? Yeah, some of those things are ancillary and important at times. But we're going to reduce, why fasting works just simply is reducing the total number of glucose and insulin spikes. It gives the body a break from storing mode or glucose management mode so it can access your stored fat. So we want to keep blood sugar stable across the day, right? But fasting is like removing half of the roller coaster track. Because you're just shrinking the time that your blood sugar is having to be managed. It's giving your body, your metabolic function, a break. Now, however, if the meals you still do eat are like cotton candy and orange juice and, Little Debbie's, gas station snack attacks and all that, then you're still riding the ride because that lag effect on the blood sugar is going to take some time for it to come back down. That's why we talk about prioritizing protein and putting clear boundaries around your fasting and your nutrition eating opportunities, your windows, so to speak, if you're new.
Yeah, and still food intentionality most of the time. So so knowing that fasting doesn't just give you that hall pass where you can just have whatever and not feel those differences, right?
Yep. Here's the tricky part with insulin and insulin resistance. It's a hormone, right? Again, that manages your blood sugar and your fat storage or utilization or burning, because we want to talk about fat loss, not weight loss. But it develops quietly. So I was struggling through this, spent thousands of dollars on functional medicine tests, hired a nutritionist here in Houston, did 6 months with him, saw some minimal changes, but he labeled me as a slow oxidizer. So I tested my gut and my testosterone and my hormone, and I was like, what is going on? Because I felt like all of the things I mentioned earlier, tired, fatigued, inflamed, sleep disruption, stress, like I just couldn't figure out why I didn't feel good. And my numbers in labs are ticking up. So when I got my insulin tested, it was high. The range is from 5 to 24 for most labs. It depends on the lab. I was in the 20s, but my blood sugar was still normal, right? So by the time fasting glucose is high, the underlying dysfunction, abdominal weight gain, fatigue, brain fog, all that stuff I just mentioned. Here's the problem with insulin resistance. It's both a cause and a consequence of underlying poor metabolic function. Mm-hmm. High blood sugar worsens resistance, resistance raises blood sugar. Breaking that cycle is the goal of what we teach in terms of lifestyle application for the fasting lifestyle, is to get you off of that insulin blood sugar roller coaster, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And so we can do that. We can do that by pulling a few different levers, like the perspective that fasting won't fix everything, at least not forever, because it's like, well, if you go back, the more weight that you have to lose, the more excess fat stores that you have to lose, the more likely that you are to see quick improvements with minimal changes needed.
Yep.
Okay, because essentially the difference between what you were doing before versus how many levers and how aggressively or how well or how consistently you're pulling them now, that difference is, you can see a big change even through a small difference there. The more the worse your habits are, the worse your lifestyle is, the more weight that you have to lose before. Okay, so then what that means is that essentially you might run into a quick balance. Like it could be like the progress is slowing down on the scale. It might feel like a plateau, or like all of a sudden things aren't working as well. I'm not seeing the changes that I was seeing before. That's just your body's way of telling you you're at a new lifestyle balance point with the scale and with how you feel.
Yeah, the inputs are matching the outputs.
Yeah. And you're likely to stay at that balance point until you either get more consistent with what you're doing, add in a little bit longer average fasting time, or take more control more of the time over some of your food choices. So essentially looking at some of these other levers, how can I pull them better? And how can I pull more of them? And then you're likely to see additional continued improvements, okay? And so understanding what the levers are, because you don't always have to get all of these right all the time, and you definitely don't have to get all of them right at the beginning to see some results. It just depends on how much improvement would you like to see. You want to see more improvement? Let's pull some more levers more consistently. It's as simple as that. And so I think that this overview here is really important, because it kind of helps you understand what are all the levers and how do I pull them, so that it can make sense. Like when I get to that point, I know where I'm going to be looking next, and then you have your next like carrot to go after. I want this improvement, so I'm going to go for this change in lifestyle, right?
Yeah, and that speaks exactly to the point of like, how do we measure this, right? We talked about how it shows up and how you feel, pretty much just weight loss resistance or diet roller coaster fatigue, right? Mm-hmm. But the ways to measure it is going to be, we talked about this and we have a guide on this, optimal blood ranges. We'll talk about optimal versus air quotes normal in just a sec. But blood tests, this is where I saw my numbers creeping up, and so many people tell us the same thing, and the doc's like, lose weight. Okay, great. What does that look like, right? Duh, I'm trying. And that's kind of what Dr. Fung said too, is when he was a late stage nephrologist and he was caring for people with metabolic disease, diabetes, etc. And he's like, either the tests and the recommendations I'm making are wrong, or all of the patients are bad patients and they're just not compliant, right? The reality is 75% of the population is overweight or obese, and the stats clearly show 6 out of 7 people can lose a considerable, statistically significant 5-10% of their body weight in the first year, but then the problem is keeping it off. So how do we measure this and look at what's going on beneath the surface? Well, fasting glucose, A1C, fasting insulin, triglycerides, HDL, not LDL. The triglyceride to HDL ratio is way more important, and APOB ideally. Now, most of these aren't included in a routine physical, so you'll have to ask, right? And here's the problem with lab ranges, is they're based on population averages, not optimal health. This is why we created the Optimal Labs Guide, because I was still in the normal range, yet I was clearly metabolically dysfunctioned
Right.
with an insulin number in the 20s. Right? So if we've got fasting glucose, the normal range 70 to 99, optimal is really below 85, 70 to 85, with a 30 to 40 point variability based on your activity and meals throughout the day. Post meal spike for non diabetics, right? Less than 140. Because one of the clarifications we made earlier is we're talking about metabolic, these numbers being within range, not on medication, because that's the whole diabetes management, wait and watch approach versus the, hey, let's reverse this and get to the root cause approach.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
post meal spike, you really don't want to go over 120. But if your baseline's a little higher, 30 to 40 points. A1C, less than 5.4, not 5.7, which is the tick mark to get you into the pre-diabetic range from an A1C standpoint.
Yeah.
And normal fasting insulin, you'll see different ranges from 5 all the way up to 24 on certain labs. Really, we want it to be less than 5, and we did a whole episode on that. So that's one way, but you're not just going to run your blood work every day or every week or every month, right? The other way is really looking at a CGM. And this is why a couple of times a year now, I will get a CGM, I will pop it on, and I will see how my body is responding from an energy utilization and blood sugar standpoint. We can then extrapolate upstream, hey, how's my insulin doing? How am I feeling? How's my energy levels? How's my brain fog? How's my sleep? How's my stress? So those are the two ways to really look at how we measure. So let's talk about, Tommy, the most important thing here is, what are our recommendations from a fasting lifestyle standpoint?
Well, you know, the recommendations start with all of the examples that you just gave. For example, the A1C, just understanding and internalizing that a small difference in the A1C, like 5.7 to a 5.4, is substantial. So just to be tangible with that, that's like going from around a 117 average blood sugar to around a 108 average blood sugar. So you're only talking about 9 points there on the blood sugar,
right?
But it's substantial because that's your rolling average as you go through that 3 month period that the HbA1c is looking at. And so how do we get there? We get there through pulling small levers very consistently. Yeah, and which is like, okay, so you talked about how easy is it to close your window, and that's a reflection not of how much willpower you have, but it's a reflection of what have your choices been lately. Because my food choices today will absolutely affect how easy is it to close my window, not only today, but tomorrow and the next day as well. Because one fast is leading into the following day. That's why we talk about fast cycling rather than what's fasting is almost typically looked at as kind of more spontaneous, sporadic.
I'm on and off. I'm going to fast today. I'm not going to fast tomorrow. Yeah. That's why the foundational fasting conversation, episode 311, so important.
Absolutely, because it's much less about, did I do a 16-hour fast versus a 20-hour fast? Yes, there's absolutely differences, and having 4 additional hours of fat burning time is substantial.
Of low insulin, low blood sugar time, right?
Yes, absolutely. And that's time that's going to add up. That's more runway for your insulin and your blood sugar to come down. That's more runway for your HbA1c to be improving that day versus staying the same or actually going up, increasing on that given day too. So pulling those small levers consistently means that I'm being intentional with my food choices. So I'm leading with my protein. So I'm setting the blood sugar and insulin response earlier in the meal, and I'm leaving less room for some of the more sugary, starchy foods that are going to then further spike my blood sugar, which is going to further spike my insulin and disturb my sleep more tonight, which is then going to make tomorrow's fasting that much more difficult. It's going to be more difficult tomorrow to close that window because of what I did today. It's also going to be more likely for me to be craving some of the sweeter things and more of the caffeine tomorrow, which is then going to be further hitting and disturbing my sleep tomorrow, making the next day that much more difficult too. And you can see how one set of choices leads to the other. And putting that together with how likely am I to move after my meals? When you're moving after your meals, you're further lowering your blood sugar and your insulin response. You're squishing the area under the curve that you would see on your continuous glucose monitor, where your blood sugar is elevated, but it's elevated for less time and it's elevated less dramatically, which means that blood sugar spike caused less insulin to be needed to be secreted by the pancreas, which then is helping you reverse those layers of insulin resistance that we were talking about. That's how on a day-to-day basis we see improvements in insulin sensitivity because of just a few choices during one meal. So a lot of times, like someone like myself, I ran into trouble over the years thinking that these kind of improvements were only going to come about from big sweeping changes that felt more like New Year's resolution, changing everything, getting everything right all the time. And then as soon as I didn't get something right, I felt off track, and then everything else kind of went out the window.
Yep.
But really, that's the worst way to look at it. And so if I'm preaching to my former self, just take it one small decision at a time, and even a bad decision over here or an imperfect one doesn't negate the next good decision that I could make. In fact, it makes it that much more important. So use that as fuel, not as a distraction or a deterrent for the next one. And the third pillar for these things to leverage would be that metabolic night shift. So you alluded to this earlier from a recent conversation that we had, and it was only a 2 to 3 hour difference in the average time of dinner led to a big metabolic change, right? A big change in insulin sensitivity, in quality of sleep, which then led to better heart rate variability and cardiometabolic markers. And so it's really, really important just to understand that fasting, as easy as it can be to just skip breakfast, in fact, being more intentional and conscientious about when dinner is actually a much bigger lever for your metabolic health, right?
Yeah, and some of the things that we see in the fasting world where and I'm speaking to myself and my previous self, and I remember my first 24-hour fast. I broke my fast with all of the things that I used to have throughout the day, like the Kirkland Costco protein bars, and then I had my dinner, and then I had a little bit of popcorn, and then I had and it was like I was trying to make up for all the lost time, right?
Yeah, some FOMO maybe.
Yeah, or skipping breakfast, but breaking the fast with a convenient, maybe more carb-laden, easy, convenient processed food, getting the coffee with the fluff in it, as I like to call it, with the the cold foam, vanilla cold foam, sweet cream, whatever it was.
Sweeten it up a little bit, yeah.
Yeah, so this is where fasting kind of... We think by doing the fast that everything else is in check. It's almost like a hall pass for our food choices.
It can be, yeah.
Right? And that happens from time to time. We're not striving for perfection. We're striving to what Tommy was talking about here is just consistent levers. And then the fact of the sedentary lifestyle that we live in today. There's a couple other things that really stand out is, if you have some form of insulin resistance, this metabolic dysfunction, right, or dysregulation going on beneath the surface, you may be seeing big blood sugar volatility from, quote, healthy foods like oatmeal, juices, certain smoothies.
Oh, yeah.
Right, where you don't even realize, that's where a CGM can come into play. So just to kind of recap action steps for you guys as listeners this week is really clean the window. So keep your existing schedule, but just lead with protein, non-starchy veggies, add fat, push the carbs and the sugary stuff and the stuff added to the coffees, and eliminate the liquid sweetened drinks. And so just do that for a week, because that's going to flatten the biggest post-fast glucose spike of the day. You mentioned moving, right? A simple thing you can do is just that 10 to 15 minutes of movement after your main meal. And we've talked a lot about this. So after your biggest meal of the day, get up and walk. 10 to 15 minutes. That's all you need.
Yeah.
Right? And then Tommy, what you mentioned was the metabolic night shift, right? No food 3 hours before bed. This is so
at least
stinking,
3 hours.
At least 3 hours.
Yeah.
So stinking important. I think I told the story on a recent episode, so apologies if you're new and you're listening and binging. My wife and I went away for a night, staycation night here to celebrate our 13-year anniversary. We went to Taste of Texas. We only booked the trip a couple of weeks ahead of schedule, and you have to book out months in advance for this place. We had a gift card to it. It was going to be great, but the only reservation time was 8:15.
Yep.
at
Wah,
night.
wah.
Wah, wah, wah. I typically stop eating by 4,
Yeah.
right? On the couple of
Mhm.
nights a week we have family dinners, I'll do 6. But I know
Yeah.
that I'm not going to bed until after 10, so it's fine. Ate well, didn't indulge, didn't overindulge, didn't have the dessert. Not a big sweets guy anyway. Didn't drink, don't drink
Hmm.
anymore. I had a couple of their famous rolls. Yes, I did, and I friggin' enjoyed it. Had the steak.
Yeah.
But we made ourselves, when we got back to the hotel, go for a walk around the grounds. Now, my wife's always encouraging us for more walks. She's always like, if she had her ideal day, we would have family dinner and then take all the kids on a walk. But we
Hmm.
have 9, soon to be 7, 6, and 4. It's not a walk, right? It's more like zigzag pattern of management. So we don't do a lot of those, especially during the work week.
Hmm.
But we made ourselves walk. But I knew that my Whoop was going to tell me that night, my wearable, that my sleep efficiency was lower because I had that big meal. And guess what? Woke up the next morning, felt groggy, felt sluggish, and I knew that I didn't have a great restful night of sleep because that big meal and that celebratory meal was so much later. That's fine. But what did I do? Started the day with my Element, had my Yeti, took the water bottles from the hotel room, filled it up, boom, started the hydration. Yeah, those first couple hours weren't fun, but I knew it was because of the lever I pulled the night before. So that sleep, that metabolic night shift is so incredibly important. And it's one of the main things that I still put in the primary position of things that I'm working on now at this point of maintenance on my fasting journey, not necessarily, the starting point when I had 50, 60 pounds to lose.
Yeah, exactly. That's a great example and a great way to kind of think through some of the almost misunderstandings or maybe uh, kind of some of the underpinnings of what we typically hear about for fasting involve one of the levers just being like skipping breakfast. And I know we've talked about this a couple of times today, but you mentioned actionable things for this week, and what I was thinking is, if it resonates with you, like if you resonate with the statement, well, fasting really isn't an issue for me because I'm never really hungry for breakfast anyway. And we hear that a lot, and I've been there too. And that can actually be one of the hidden metabolic inefficiencies, one of the
Yep.
metabolic dysfunctions.
Dinner's, let's just be honest, dinner's just easier.
It's easier, it's more social, it can be time with the family,
Yep.
or you get out of the house, whatever the case may be. It could be date time, social time, whatever. There's so many reasons why about 95% of the thousands of people we polled said if they had to choose one meal, and oftentimes do with a one meal a day and OMAD fasting schedule, they will choose dinner. So it is by far overwhelmingly the most popular choice. The trouble is that if that's the only time that you're eating, it can be very easy to overdo that meal or to feel so hungry because you haven't had other calories during the day that you just end up piling more on. And it's not necessarily the calories that are the problem, it's that we're less metabolically efficient as the
Yep.
day goes on. So our body's actually trying to transition towards that sleep mode, but we're
Yep.
giving it a whole bunch of jobs like you did, unfortunately, during the staycation. And then those were good jobs. It was a very
Yep.
protein paced meal,
Yep.
but still there was a reason why you had those sleep disturbances. And the more metabolic inefficiency, the more insulin resistance that you have, the more likely you are to feel that. So
Yep.
my point was, make it a point this week, try out a couple of days where you don't just wait until lunch to break that fast. Even if you're not all that hungry, break
Yep.
it with a really protein paced breakfast anyway, instead of especially going for the more carbohydrate rich lunch foods, especially if you're at an office and maybe it's sandwich or
Maybe it's food
other.
trucks. Maybe it's
Yeah.
everyone orders out from whatever sandwich shop, whatever it is. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Those are the most likely, most popular, convenient,
Yep.
available solutions. So instead of doing that, break that fast already in the morning. Even if you're not all that hungry, you could still have some good protein. And then instead of having that later dinner, have it much earlier, or
Yep.
let dinner be the meal that you skip for once, and see how that feels. See how your sleep feels, because that's likely going to make for an easier following day, easier closing the window, easier sticking to the
Yep.
fast. So get out of your comfort zone a little bit this week.
So for the next 7 days, here's what you do: you clean the windows, clean up your fasting windows, Prioritize protein like Tommy mentioned. Excuse me. Move after your biggest meal of the day. And protect that sleep in that metabolic night shift. That's it. Those are the three things. That's what we want you to do for the next week. Stick to it, regardless of where you're on your fasting journey. A little refresh doesn't hurt. And fasting isn't a metabolic tool, is a metabolic tool. It's not a magic trick, right? And that's why we wanted to talk about this metabolic function standpoint, because without the understanding of like the basic glucose and insulin basics, even with fasting, sometimes you're just throwing darts in the dark. So as we wrap up today, Tommy, when you zoom out, fasting is just like our recommendation for the most powerful one lever you can pull in a much bigger story. When you pair it with solid metabolic basics like stable glucose, calmer insulin, better sleep, and simple movement, you stop white knuckling your fasting lifestyle and start living, you stop white knuckling your daily fast, your on-off mentality, and you start living a fasting lifestyle that actually restores your health for the long haul. It's not just about the weight loss, and we're on this journey with you. We want to encourage you. Take one of the action steps from today. Head to the show notes, grab a resource, share a link, phone a friend if you got a fasting buddy. Let us know how we can support you. But Tommy, as always, man, I appreciate the conversation, and we will talk soon.
Thank you. Bye. So, you've heard today's episode, and you may be wondering, where do I start? Head on over to thefastingforlife.com and sign up for our newsletter, where you'll receive fasting tips and strategies to maximize results and fit fasting into your day-to-day life.
While you're there, download your free Fast Start guide to get started today. Don't forget to subscribe on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Make sure to leave us a 5-star review, and we'll be back next week with another episode of Fasting for Life.